sometimes human, sometimes animal, all conceived with extraordinary imagination and a wealth of expressive detail.
Live more natural lives in their unnatural habitats.
Becoming aware of nature, of natural details, and so forth.
But whenever he can, he has to be ready to investigate the unexpected and unusual, because it may contribute to what he wants to know.
We're talking about the sorts of things that had an impact in as much as they came from one part of the world and journeyed to another and acted in the mode of impact, impulse, influence, and so on.
We want to hinder the man at the wheel, who hurls the lance of his spirit across the earth along the circle of its orbit.
I'd suggest that we should rather look for changing angles of vision.
An inventive tradition which was able to handle with considerable equanimity a long list of wonders.
Welcome back to another episode of Administrism. This time we are coming at you after several months of research, and we are covering the Sámi people of northern Finland. It's like Finland, Norway, and Russia, right?
Yeah, Finno-Scandia.
Yeah, because most of and this gets into the history of it, but like a lot of the older texts that we were reading referred to it just as Lapland.
They're not Laps.
No, they are not. So we've got the Sámi people, and they're from the far north and live in the Arctic Circle. And the first thing that I would like to do in approaching this is throw out the misconception of them just being reindeer herders. So that kind of stereotype took over very heavily in the 1800s. And to step back a bit, the Sámi were a vast group of people, and they existed in many different biomes. So you had essentially like the reindeer Sámi, you had the forest Sámi, the lake Sámi, you had all of these different groups of people, and their languages were just as different as their ways of living. But as Western civilization started pushing into their living, it kind of forced them into a specific way of life. And reindeer herding was back in the 1800s. Fur trading was booming. And if you wanted to survive and get by with the government, you would supply the government or the state with furs. And this is what a lot of Sámi people ended up doing. They became kind of itinerant reindeer herders when they weren't living where they wanted to. But it was a very insidious way that the European peoples pushed into the Sámi's culture and their way of life. Because at first, it was very, very kind of respectful. Like, they set up boundaries and said, like, no, the Sámi can pass over borders and do what they want. This is Sámi land. They can do what they want. But then it started pushing into forced assimilation, where in order for you to own land rights, you had to speak the language, like Norwegian. You had to be fluent in Norwegian, otherwise you couldn't own anything, and you were considered a trespasser on state land. Yeah, so from there, like, it wasn't as we are aware with the indigenous people in North America, where there was a wholesale slaughter of them. Rather, it was as I had said, a forced assimilation and like a trying to reculture the Sámi people. When it came to them changing their ways of life, no longer being able to be nomadic, when the states of Finland and Russia and Norway started setting up borders and no longer allowing them to cross over the borders, ruining their nomadic way of life, they had to settle down in a way that wasn't comfortable to them. But in doing so, they became considered one of the state's population. And so, like, they started losing their native names and adopting Finnish names or Norwegian names. And their culture and their people just slowly disappeared that way. Despite the fact that later on, there were efforts to, teach Sami. Even in the 1600s, there were books that were being written in Sami. The first book that was written in Sami was an alphabet book in the 1600s. But despite all of that, like, they were still forced to abandon their way of life. Otherwise, they would receive no benefits, and the state would continue granting their tribal land to people who would move out there and stake claim.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, this, a lot of what we had read, and I think we have a list of about 14 different sources.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the things that we read, a lot of it covered the history. And there wasn't as much of a cultural flavor to it and descriptions on how they lived their lives day to day. But a lot of that was due to the fact that their history is what gives their culture now an explanation. Because a lot of their culture had been just completely assimilated and slowly pushed away, becoming nothing. Even their languages, despite the fact, as I had said, there were books, and even in the 1960s, there were TV programs that were done in Sami. It's been considered by the state more of like, something that's kind of a quaint sort of thing. It's nothing that was like, oh, you should learn Sami to become, more educated. It was like, no, let's have the Sami have their thing. But really, if you want to get ahead, you need to learn and speak Norwegian fluently. Otherwise, you're not going to get into school, and you're just going to be taken advantage of by the state.
Mm-hmm. So this group historically has been a little bit of conundrum because they speak the most closely related language to is it Sápmi is how you would say it, is Samoyed, and they don't look like Samoyeds. So they presented a conundrum historically. Like, it was really hard to figure out where they fall in the history of migrations. And luckily we have DNA now, and it is quite interesting because they are a mixed group, like a heavily mixed group. The bulk of their ancestry does come from the Russian northern coast, where the Samoyed are from and their language is from. But on the mitochondrial haplogroups, the one most represented comes out of Poland, which explains why they don't look like the groups they're most closely related to. I found that quite interesting, and they were not the original people of this area. There was the pitted beaker culture, or pitted ware culture, and it seems like they just kind of coexisted and didn't intermingle for the most part. And then one went away in the Samoyeds the Sami, because they aren't tied down to a lifestyle, probably didn't have as drastic of a change to their lifestyle as the other neighboring groups. It's hard to parse out because a lot of the archaeological stuff you look for to build out this historical record wouldn't continue to exist because they are in a forested area. You're going to make most of your lifestyle items out of wood and stuff that degrades within your lifetime. So it's a real tricky group to research on the archaeological level.
Yeah, and one thing that I would like to point out that you kind of touched on with them living side by side, that kind of reflects how their history sort of unfolded and why their culture became assimilated, is because the Sami are a very peaceful people. In recorded history, there has only been kind of one violent outbreak amongst the Sami people towards outsiders, and that was in 1852, and only, like, I think three people were murdered but it was believed to have been an act of religious fanaticism.
Yeah.
But apart from that, there was no other, in the hundreds, thousands of years, they were not a warring people. They were not, they had no need to do that. Being nomadic, they would take from the land what they needed and move on. They didn't see themselves owning land. And so there was nothing really to fight over. One of the things that was a very steady practice amongst them was the reciprocity with nature. And because of that, their population has always been historically pretty low. Whereas outsiders would come in, it's like, okay, we have logging, and now there's a town, and now there's more food, and we're going to grow. The Sami people didn't grow like that. Historically, there were groups of them that would come together that were kind of led by I'm trying to remember the word, I think it's Satel, but it was essentially a temporary governing body amongst a group of different locally bound people, and they would come together periodically and then make decisions on what to do with, excess hunting or marriage and things like that. And that was their kind of governing body. But then after that, it was it being temporary and them being nomadic people that would just dissipate. And that was part of why it was so fucking easy for them to be assimilated into Scandinavian culture, because they just never fought back. They never felt the need to. In fact, there was one group of Sami. I'm trying to remember which specific one. They're known as the Lake Sami, but I can't remember their specific name. But they themselves were considered a very humble people. And even, I think it wasn't Tacitus. There was another historian who had written that giving them, being amongst them and giving them even the most paltry things, they were content. They didn't feel a need to accumulate wealth or accumulate anything, like, by giving them anything. They were humbled by that. They appreciated that. And like, even amongst this whole group of people, there was a specific group that was considered even more humble. But yeah, like, that's one fact that I think is extremely important, especially coming from a North American standpoint, where we see the genocide of the indigenous people in North America. That came with a lot of wars. That came with a lot of killings, but not so much here. And yet a culture was still almost wiped out.
Yeah. Back to their practices with their environment. They do land acknowledgement, but not the way we think of land acknowledgement. They acknowledge the land itself as a living thing when they go to do activities that may extract from that area, and it's built into their culture. So it's kind of neat. It is a built-in animism that you can't quite like knock out of them.
Mm-hmm. And there was one of the books that I remember reading, the Sami people of the North, I believe. It was talking about like the innate animism in everything. Everything had a spirit, and you had to work with those spirits in order to succeed. Because if you pissed off a single one, bad things are going to happen to you. So it's just religiously reinforcing that reciprocity of land stewardship.
Yeah, they recognize themselves as guests at all times, that they're not in their actual spot they reside.
Mm-hmm. And I was just reminded, when you were talking about the language, one thing that did bother me when I picked up this one book, I think it was A Year in Lapland.
Ugh.
It
yep.
started, yeah. It started off by saying, yeah, the Sami have over like 80 different words for, and that was when I stopped, because okay, the same thing has been said about other northern living people like the Inuit or Athabascan people. They have dozens or hundreds of words for snow. They don't. I mean, they do, but in the same way that we do. It's a polysynthetic language. So you have a root word, and then a prefix or suffix is attached to that word in order to change the meaning of the root. It'd just be like if we were to say, yeah, this is dry snow, except it was one word.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is crunchy snow, this is wet snow, this is really fluffy snow. Like, it's the same thing. They don't have all these different words for snow, and it's the same with the Sami. It is a polysynthetic language. They use root words and attach prefixes and suffixes onto them in order to change that meaning. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. That was annoying.
Yeah. A lot of this writing was like 19th century, just at best respectfully ignorant, at worst just racist. Which is weird from our perspective, because we look at these people and we're like, it's kind of hard to be racist against them from our end, but they found a way.
Yeah, and there's like a turning point when it comes to study of the Sami, and it happened around the 1970s. Prior to that, you had all of these people who would fucking call themselves like Laplandologists or Lapologists, and they would study the Sami people, but they always did so from like kind of viewing them as an exhibition.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the 1970s that there was a drastic change in the culture of the Sami. Like, going back further into the 1800s, they started binding together, and you had mentioned the word before, Sápmi. Sápmi translates to land of the Sami. And so like they kind of formed an association amongst all of these disparate groups, realizing that if we bind ourselves together and start working together, we can help each other out rather than being these disparate groups who are separated by miles, who are separated by even language. But in the 1970s, there was a cultural change to start taking back this culture, and things like art and literature and music started becoming much more prevalent, and it was owned by these people again. Like, they were much more proud of who they were, and in doing so, like, they were able to take the academic focal point and turn it inwards. So you started having more books and experiences expressed by people who were Sami rather than an outsider looking in.
Now, they have some interesting cultural practices, especially in how they live with each other. And I found this to be very interesting. If they find something on the ground, they leave it there. It's considered other people's property. They always ask permission for everything. So much so that when they go to build a house in the community, they will ask everyone there if it's okay. Then place down 4 stones where the corners of that house will be and camp that site for several months before they make their final decision, which I found pretty cool. I wish I could do that while house shopping. I wouldn't have the dickhead neighbor I have right now if I could have just camped the yard.
Yeah. Or like, just setting up rocks instead of getting zoning permits. Like, this is where I'm gonna put my shed. Are y'all cool with that? Let's give it about 6 months. I'll still block it off. And if you're not okay with that, we'll figure something else out.
Yeah, that gives you time to figure out if, this is a really bad idea. The water flow on this property just ain't going to work. And it also helps you decide if you can deal with the children next door and deal with whatever reindeer situation you got in that spot.
Yep.
They have some really cool ways they raise their kids. I was just floored by this. when a daughter is born, she gets a reindeer on that day. And when she hits a certain age, I can't remember if it's 2 or 5, she gets a second reindeer on that day. And they gift her reindeer. She gets her herd before she can even manage the herd. And she doesn't manage the herd necessarily. That's her husband's job. But before she has a husband, she has a reindeer herd. And the children carry knives. Like, as babies, as soon as they can walk, they're given a knife, which I thought was kind of cool. You'd respect a toddler.
Wasn't that a similar thing that happened amongst the Metsagenga when we talked about them?
They had something like that where the child is given their responsibility early.
Yeah, like you give a 2-year-old a knife and it's like, all right, here, go cut up some fruit.
Yeah, they'll be slaughtering reindeer, and the kids are just there helping out. Like, babies are out there helping you slaughter reindeer covered in blood. This is some Metalocalypse shit. I kind of dig it. I like the early exposure to this situation because, hey, in our lives, we may never kill an animal, and if we had to see it done, we might faint. But they're just making sure that kid can keep doing that culture from the beginning, and that I thought that was pretty rad of them. So
and there was a similar thing that I had read in the book The Sami People, Traditions and Transition, where you had these people who would still they'll go into fucking I can't think of a Norwegian town off the top of my head, but they'll go into one and they'll act as a retail clerk or whatever, but they're still very much studied in these traditional ways of things because there is always this sort of inherent distrust of how the state is going to potentially look at them one day. And are they going to take their lands? Am I not Finnish enough?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just going to wander back here and then go do the thing that my people have been doing forever.
Yeah, they have a fallback plan, which is kind of nice. Like, they can decide their engagement with the modern world, which I dig that for them. Their calendar, the way that they set up their life is around, for one of the subsections of the Sami, the habits of the reindeer and where you can put them. So they have 8 seasons, not 4. I don't think they even really respect the idea of a month. It's time to move the reindeer.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's all made up anyway. And yeah, this is when we graze at this field, and this is when we migrate back down, and those are the actual seasons of their calendar, and they cycle through it every year in repetition. And yeah, they're deeply tied to these animals. I thought that was cute.
The one cultural practice that I like the most is their singing practices, or what they would refer to as the yoik. And the reason I like it so much is because even though in a couple of the books that I've read, it never really outright said it, but as a chaos magician, all of this made sense. So yoik is a kind of singing, and it's a traditional kind of singing. However, amongst the Sami people, singing is traditional. You sing all the time, sing, and it's not just you can have made up melodies or whatever, but what a yoik is it's a personification of something. A yoik, a song, it has a melody that gives life to something else. It is representative of something else's life. And so you could have yoiks that are representative of animals. And while you are singing these songs, you slowly become more like that animal. You if there's a wolf song, you'll start growling in the song, or yipping or barking. That's just the way that song is, because it represents the life of that animal. And the thing that I liked the most about it was how you would have yoiks, you would have these melodies for people who mean something to you, like your friends, your family, your loved ones. And these melodies, these songs, they would never sing them themselves because that would be a sign of vanity. However, like, you would sing that person's song whenever you saw them, or if you wanted to cheer them up, or if you wanted to get them excited. Like, that was your way of, like, giving them a kind of, like, musical sacrament. It's like, hey, like, I love you. I want to sing your song because you're awesome. This is yours.
More than that, you are that song.
Yes.
So going back to the wolf yoik, that is not them summoning the wolf. That is them making the wolf present. And if someone has died and you made a yoik for them, they are not dead because you have that yoik. And every time you sing that, they are present in the community, which I thought was beautiful. That this death practice is something that we could use in our death fearful culture.
Yeah. And like, I thought it was amazing, the fact that, yeah, each aspect of this is just inherently magical. You have aspects of invocation, you have aspects of evocation with it, you have aspects of supplication. Like, there are all of these different aspects that are just reflected in singing songs. And the songs themselves, even the structure of them, are designed to be recursive, right?
They're circles.
So, like, the end of the song, the last notes of the song are meant to, like, headway into the beginning of the song, or into the beginning of the song, so that way it would just form a loop.
So something to keep in mind when talking about the Sami and their traditions and even their stories, their mythologies. I listened to a whole book of their mythologies, and they got a lot of giants. They've got their tricksters. They've got your usual suspects. But for this group, keep in mind that the symbols are not universal ideas across all of them. So when you read about one, you are reading about whoever that researcher or author was talking to at the time. And it does not cover the other versions of it. And I think we've run into this before, where one story of the emu could be X and another could be Y, and neither the twain shall meet. Or, that's their version of it, but this is our version of it. So it has context.
And it goes back to how, like I had mentioned, they, like, before Western society started coming in, they were not a homogenous culture. Like, they were separated by language. Like, they were mutually intelligible or unintelligible in some aspects. So, like, they shared certain cultural practices, but that doesn't mean that they all shared the same beliefs.
Yeah. Some other cool things from their religious practice. They build altars, but these are not going to be obvious as we view altars. They're called Cites. They're standing stones. There will only be one or two of them in a given area, but these are altars for appeal, and anyone can use them. Like, you and I can walk up to it and use it. It is not offensive for us to participate in the use of the altar, which I think is very beautiful and welcoming. It's the touchstone of the guardian of that place. I hope I got that right. And you would make offerings to it, but you would have to actually be in need of the service of that guardian. You don't just go and give it supplications just because you want to. You have to come in with a request for help from these guardians. And these were knocked down and defaced and removed by the encroaching governments that came from the south. But you will still find them being rebuilt and reestablished in these areas. Their religious experts are called Noidi.
Yeah, I did not even try to pronounce any of these properly, and it's the same with Finnish. Finnish is difficult. So I looked at the word and I moved on.
Yeah, and my I know my text to speech device does not cover this. So, yeah, that would be the people who handle the religion, and they bore the brunt of the violence when the forced assimilation would come in. They would be rounded up and killed and burned as witches. And their tradition is almost completely gone. So each Noidi would have a different practice, and anyone could be a Noidi, but of course in most cultures it'll lean mostly male. Women have other things going on, but this group, we can't get the information from them because every one of them was completely different, had different practices. What we can get is that they had tiny little pocket fetishes. And when they would do divination, I can't remember if they were stone or bone, they would have like an otter in there or a seal in there. And they would perform their divinations using this pocket of tricks, which I couldn't actually figure out if it was legitimate or not. Just like, okay, another thing, the whole relationship with Amanitas muscaria, not legitimate.
Nope.
It's not a thing. They didn't do it. That's like a modern thing we projected onto them.
Mm-hmm. Which you reminded me, there was this one quote from the book Traditions and Transition that I really liked when it was talking about like historical, or how historically Europeans would view the Sami people and their religion. So, quote, apparently it is the precise knowledge of nature that was the basis of, quote, controlling the weather and reindeer herds, which ancient sources tell us that the Sami were capable of doing. According to one writer, the Finlap is able to raise any kind of wind he wishes. It probably was a matter of making predictions by using signs in nature that seers were masters at recognizing through traditional knowledge of many thousands of years. When seen from outside, though, these predictions were wrongfully interpreted as commanding natural phenomena. This belief led hopeful travelers from Central Europe to come to buy wind from the Sami. One of them boasted of getting one for the ridiculously low price of 10 crowns and a pound of tobacco.
I mean, a pound of tobacco could go pretty far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to, like, that's just to have someone say, yeah, that it's gonna get windy here in a minute.
Yep. No, it has nothing to do with those clouds in the upper atmosphere. No,
Nope.
I'm gonna bring you some wind.
I respect that grift.
I want to know how they thought they were gonna get that wind back to Poland.
Right? Just go ahead. You can keep it. Just box it up. I'll gift wrap it for you.
I think those people didn't deserve the money in their pockets if they couldn't figure this part out.
Nope.
So their cosmic worldview is tripartite, like a lot of them. You have your upper, which will be your highest gods ruling over all of existence. They're distant and you don't really do much with them. You got your middle, which is your earthly, your human and spirits, the divine entities, advisors and companions to the Noidi. And then the lower, which is not where bad people go, as in a lot of Western views, but it's just where the dead is. And there's several realms there. They have different ways of dividing that out. There is an Axis Mundi, which I love these. They pop up all over the place. They're almost a unifying human characteristic at this point, An axis mundi is a world tree that goes straight through the world. It's the communication device between the upper, the lower, the heavens, all of it. And they have it. It's hard to say if this is syncretism that comes from Norse religions, because there is a lot of overlap with the Norse religions, but they are distinct in their practices. The highest...
I do remember that their axis mundi was bound to the North Star. That is how it tied itself to the upper realm.
Okay, yeah. I didn't read all the books that you read. I think we just shot at the list.
Yeah.
So their highest god, Virelden, Amai, or Roet, damn it, these words. Raidi, he maintains the cosmic order, gives fertility, and created the humans. And an ox reindeer will be sacrificed to him so they can lubricate the axis mundi. So that is lubricated with the blood of reindeers. Again, we got some metalocalypse imagery with this one.
Fucking metal.
The earthly gods are mostly female, or been presented. And it's a primal mother and then her 3 children, which all cover the lives of children in various divisions and things necessary for life. Like one of them is the goddess of boys and bow making. And one of them is the goddess of doors, menstruation, and young women. But when it comes to the things that matter in their lifestyle, it's the women gods, the female gods that would take those places. In the lower sphere, they do have things that we would kind of relate to demons, but they don't really. They're kind of chill. They don't come to pester us for the most part. There is a division of hell, not hell, division of the lower world that is hell-like. It's just where you get sequestered if you sucked in real life. But the lower sphere overlaps with our sphere, so it comes up into our sphere. So we got a little bleed over from it in the highest portion of it. But yeah, all the guardian spirits, all the mountain spirits are down in the deeper aspect of the lower sphere, which makes it kind of nice. It's like a gnome god almost.
Yeah, I mean the only one that I can think of that's slightly different was their wind god. I'm not even going to begin to pronounce that because that just looks like someone grabbed a handful of Scrabble letters to me. But they're the wind god was linked to all sorts of natural phenomenon, including an unusual stone or a bent over tree. And so this deity would be worshipped for a private deity, but also during the autumn and spring, because the wind is coming back during the migrations. And they would leave offerings of reindeer parts for the wind god. And so that's the only pretty common one I can think of that wasn't a female.
Yeah, they had quite a few, but when it came to their lifestyle stuff, it was largely woman centric, and it kind of makes sense because the women own the herds. They kind of own all the property and the men manage it. And it actually works out really good for the ladies in this aspect because you have to respect the woman to marry her. But I love this. They have the wedding night rejection psychodrama. It is a tradition for the woman when she is getting married to throw a tantrum and not participate and try to get out of getting married. And we've seen this before.
This sounds familiar.
This sounds familiar, yeah. But it is not... It's a ritual. It's not that she doesn't want to get married, but on her wedding night, she's expected to fight every aspect of the marriage. Now, this was in the South African peoples that we covered, where they were expected to reject and divorce after the first marriage. So we see this again where we have this anti-marriage ritual, which I would love to see this in play. I don't know if they still continue this practice. It would be a lot different with technology now because they are kind of integrated into the technological world.
Yeah, the wedding night is just I blocked all of his socials.
Oh, the drama of the postings you would get from a 17-year-old girl not wanting to get married. So as I was saying, it's really hard to tell if these practices are still continuing to this day because of the forced assimilations that happened. But that doesn't mean they didn't have ways to work around this. They had their own practices they brought to it. So they were forced to come to church every Sunday. And then they would have to go. They have a ritual of washing church off of them. Or, you know, in christening. A christening is when you take your child after they are born to church to get their official Christian name and all that jazz. It's not really a popular practice in the U.S. I know it's still, some churches do it. But they would take the baby home and give it a ritual bath and wash off the church experience and apologize to their own gods. But they would what's the word for it? They would apologize to their gods for participation in these other gods, but they still did it because they had to do it if they wanted to have any kind of life in these regions.
There was early on in, I think, about 1860, there was one form of Christianity, essentially, that kind of swept through the Sami people, and that was the Laestadian faith.
And that's a real interesting one.
Yeah, it was basically led just by a dude named what was his name? I know his name was Laestadium. But Laestadius. But like he was a kind of Lutheran, sort of, but a lot of his practices kind of had to do with like ecstatic Christianity. So like they went through moments of like during the preaching, there would be states of ecstasy. There would be people who would be shouting during it. There would be like fervor that would go around. But part of the reason why it swept through the Sami people is because this dude was a dick. And so like he spent time studying Sami mythology and their belief system so that way he could incorporate it into his sermons in order to like be able to quote unquote prove their beliefs wrong.
Yeah, that's a pretty common practice, but this is probably the first case of syncretic Lutheranism I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, shit gets weird when it gets cold, I guess. The only thing that I would like to add as we kind of wrap up on like practices of the Sami and everything is the identity of the Sami and what they like, who they are now. Like as you had mentioned with the altar thing, right? They're a very welcoming people. From this the thesis called Being Sami that we had written, there was one quote in it that said, "The utterance of I am Sami makes a person Sami as much as it reflects their ability to say it." There are a lot of aspects within this culture where it's like, we understand that your culture has been robbed from you, and we're not here to gatekeep on what it means to be a Sami, because we realize that we were a disparate group in the first place. We came together in order to fight colonizers, sort of, in as much of a bureaucratic way as possible. But we realize that there's no sense in gatekeeping, because if we want to keep our culture alive, like, we can't shut off someone else's experience. And there's the aspect of knowing the language is a great indicator that you are Sami, but at the same time, they also realized that their language had been taken from them. Like, they're in that kind of forced integration into Norwegian or Finnish or Russian culture. Like, they forgot their language. So, yeah, it's great if you know it, but if you don't, that's fine. Like, there are all of these other aspects of being Sami that make you Sami. Like, being Sami is about your experience in this place and with your family ties, and that's what makes you who you are. It's not up to us to tell you who you are.
Yeah, and one of those things you see in these groups who are doing their best to recover from assimilation and near genocide is they've lost so much in that process that they themselves are aware that to build it back together, it's going to take more than what they have left. Or to preserve what they have, it's going to take more than what they have left. And you see this in currently the Oklahoma Cherokee Nation is inviting everyone to come learn Cherokee. Why are they doing that? They're going to lose the language. But also, what does it mean to invite you to learn that language? It's to bring others to them. Now, that's not to say necessarily that you would become Sami, but it would tie you to them and it would put you in relation to them in a way that you weren't before. And if I could learn this kind of language, I would, but these are so hard. The polysynthetics are so hard to learn, and you have to have exposure to them to learn them.
Yeah, like there's the example of the Lake Sami. I had finally found their name amongst they call themselves the Somaliyas, and they only number about 900 of them, and only about 350 of them can speak their own language.
Yeah.
And it's fucking sad.
It's sad. And, there's things that they've got to correct in the record, such as the use of mushrooms by their shaman. They didn't do that. What they did was They drummed. And here's something I want people to understand. And I just don't think that we get it in America, that not all shaman practices involve chemically altered states. Most of them do not. It is the drumming. It is the trance that they get from the drumming. And the drum was one of the most important things to the Sami. And the governments came in, collected their drums, and burned them. They just piled them up and burned them.
That was always one of my favorite practices amongst their religious experts. Like, when they'd go into the trance state, they would have this drum, and on the top of the drum, they would draw out a map of the spirit world. And so, like, when they would go into trance, like, they knew where to go while they were in this state because they had the map sitting right in front of them, and they could trace a path to where they needed to go in order to get something accomplished. And I thought that was fucking amazing.
And one of the neat things about that painting, that art, is you will see this repeated in other cultures, this map of either the world or the other side of the world. You will see the same pattern showing up again and again in other cultures. So maybe there's a unifying property here that if we explored a little deeper, we could understand better how the spirit world moves around us, interacts with us. It's just something to keep in mind when we're looking at these cultural items, the hard goods, that these things have meaning. It's not just that we're making noise with it. There's unifying properties across this practice.
So yeah, I've discussed everything that comes to mind for me about the Sami. Unless there was anything you would like to add.
I just really like the way they handle childcare. Hand a baby a knife. Yes.
Hand a baby a knife. Put him in the Thunderdome.
Yes. Let that baby take out that reindeer. That's, oh my gosh. We don't even let kids use safety scissors at that age.
Nope. Hand him a machete.
Oh my gosh. I think teenagers would be less scary if they started wielding knives as children. It wouldn't be this newly discovered thing in the weirdest part of your life.
Yeah. They would understand how, like, some sort of, bodily coordination.
So, my plant of this episode is not going to be one that people look at and say, oh yeah, that's a spiritually significant plant. But this is a highly significant plant, just like corn is for the American cultures. In these circumpolar regions, Angelicas are very important, and that's how you find where you're going to be in the spring. It's going to be a plant that tells you what the rest of this season is going to be about. So what is an Angelica? It's going to look very similar to a hemlock or a hogweed or a carrot. It's closer to the hemlock in its shape, size, and structure. It just doesn't have the little freckles on the stems. I grow 2 different species of Angelica at work. This plant, it is a biennial, so once it goes to flower, it's done. It goes to seed and dies. But when it starts coming up in the riverbanks, in the forest, you collect it. This is your vegetables, and this is the primary vegetable of the Sami, and pretty much everyone who lives in this kind of condition, they wait all year for this to pop back up. It does have medicinal properties. I would not use it for medicinal properties because I believe, from what I can tell from their concentrations, that it is so low that you have to actually be starving or depleted in something for it to work as a therapeutic. But it is still used today in the Scandinavian countries to flavor candies, to flavor different kinds of confections. They don't use it as much as a vegetable, as a sustaining item, but to the people who do live out in away from the cities, away from the places where they bring you food, this plant is the harbinger of spring and summer. It is the thing that's going to get them through until the time comes for a particular fish run for that region, or it's time to move or cull some of the reindeer herd. And I do encourage everyone to grow it. You can get these seeds quite easily. They're quite easy to grow, but they need double stratifications for the most part. And most people don't know what that means. So what a double stratification is you put it in the fridge wet on a damp cloth for about 3 months. You take it out, you leave it on the counter for another 3 months. Then you stick it back in the fridge for another 3 months. So you have a 9-month cycle. You have to time it out just right to get this to work. You could sow this in the ground, but by the time it germinates, you're probably going to forget what it is and assume that it is poison hemlock when it finally sprouts. As with everything in this category of plants, the sap can burn your skin. Almost everything in the carrot family, Umbelliferaceae, has a sap that if you get it on your skin and UV light hits that spot, you're going to blister up just like you got poison ivy severely. So just be careful if you choose to grow this.
Duly noted. So my homesteady bit, the thing that I would like to talk about is something that a lot of people can use. It's a great hobby thing, especially like where I'm at. I've got a lot of it. Look for clay. Make your own clay goods. Now, when you go out into like just digging clay out of the earth, it's not going to be great for just making pottery and cups and whatever you want to make out of it. You actually have to render it. And in order to do so, you just sift things out. you'll get it wet and you'll sift things through into finer and finer mesh until you get rid of all the rocks, all the sticks, whatever, until it's a really finely graded kind of slurry. And then once it hits that slurry stage, then you let it dry and bring that together and you'll have clay. You'll have good workable clay. Now, in order to fire it, in order to actually make it into pottery, there's one thing that a lot of people kind of forget about or fuck up. You need to add a ballast. You need to add some like tempering material. Now, this tempering material, when you're making the pottery or whatever, you'll just mix it in, and this can be either sand or broken pots. So like once you've broken one of them, you have an infinite amount of ballast. So you can keep doing this, and because otherwise, if you don't incorporate this medium into the clay, when you fire it, it will break. It will shatter. It is these fine particulates that hold and bind the clay together under high heat. Like you may still get cracking in when you're firing it, and you can fire it just in a campfire or a bonfire or whatever. You just put it in, let the fire burn around it, and you'll learn through trial and error what the optimum ratio is going to be for you. But yeah, it's highly rewarding being able to make, your own like cups or pots or plates or something that you could use them for magical uses. You could create like an altar plate or something, or an offering cup, or you could just make a neat mug that you can drink your coffee out of in the morning, and you can decorate it however you want. And you just dig it up in your backyard. Well, if you've got clay in your backyard.
I want to add, if your backyard is in the Ohio River Valley, do not do this. You can use it for offerings, like your altar and stuff like this. Do not make your coffee cup out of clay you found in the Ohio River Valley. Why? Because this place has so much shit in the ground that you are playing a not great game if you use these for consumables.
Even though the ground spice makes the food nice, try to avoid heavy metals. As delicious as they are, you don't want to eat cadmium or lead.
That's a time-honored tradition in this city, sir.
Yes, I am shitting on the founders of your city by telling you not to eat cadmium or lead.
It does explain a lot.
And so, like, the last thing I would like to add from, like, what we've done with the Sami, like, one thing that you can take and add into your own practice, I would say, like, one thing I'm going to start doing is just, like, humming melodies for things. Like, giving things their own songs. And it doesn't even have to be anything spectacular. Like, I could just hum a couple bars for something, and now I know that by humming those couple bars, that's what it is. Like, I sing stupid songs to my dog.
You yoik
I can
your dog.
do it to other things.
Yeah, go out there and make some yoik.
Yoik it up. Well, that's all we have for you this episode. So the next episode that we will be doing, we had a listener submit a suggestion, and we will be studying the Hijra of South Asia.
This one's going to be interesting because they are a culture, they're a subculture, and they are incorporated under the Hindu umbrella. So we're going to be working our brains hard to sort this one out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll do our best, and we will come back to report the results. So thanks for joining us on this episode, and as always, we will be posting all of the sources that we used and everything. Feel free to join us online, give us your own suggestions of what cultures you would like to hear us cover or learn more about, what research we can do. But thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Bye.
I had a job interview today, and in the interview she saw that I have a degree in anthropology, and she's like, "Why would you want to work at a warehouse if you have a degree in anthropology?" Let me tell you.
Sweet titties. That'll do.